Two-time Grammy Award-winning bassist Todd Coolman is with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you, Toby. Thank you for having me on your show.
Now, you've got quite the career. You've won 2 Grammys and played with all sorts of different people. So what's it like to be a bassist, first of all?
Well, it's really a blessing, and I feel extremely fortunate to be able to do something that I love and call it my occupation and my vocation.
Yeah. So how did it first start off for you? What got you into jazz music?
I think, to make a long story short, a friend loaned me an LP, a recording. He was not only a friend, but he was an early bass teacher and mentor. And we had been studying classical music all along, and he handed me a jazz recording and said, thought you might want to hear this. There's a bassist on here that plays another kind of way than we do, and I thought it might interest you. And the recording was the Oscar Peterson Trio, and the bassist was Ray Brown.
Oh.
And all I can say is when I heard that recording, it changed my life.
Yeah. Do you think that to enjoy jazz music, you have to be, I don't know, a bit geeky or more interested in music? Because it's not particularly mainstream, is it?
No, it's not a mainstream music. It's what we might call a connoisseur's music.
Yeah.
But, I think that in order to enjoy any art form, whether it be music, visual arts, or any other form of artistic expression, the more people can enjoy it, the more open their minds are. Yeah. And if they, like anything that a connoisseur might enjoy, it's an acquired taste. You have to have an attention span longer than 30 seconds in order to get involved in just about anything. So I think all the arts asks is come with an open mind and give us an opportunity to maintain your attention long enough for you to make an informed decision. And even if after one listening, you're not so inclined, perhaps it's worth returning. I think we've all learned that in one form or another over the years, that maybe our first experience wasn't so good, but we tried a few times and found that we discovered a new love.
Yeah, it's a bit like food, really.
Very much so. I know that in my young life, I was sort of a meat and potatoes guy. Yeah. And then I had a chance to travel around the world in my music. And of course, you don't have so many choices. They're not going to cook for you in your style when you're in the middle of Romania, And so I was exposed to the culinary arts through travel and found to my surprise that I really enjoyed a lot of aspects, widened my palate, so to speak, and found a few things that I didn't care for. But that's all good. I tried them all.
Yeah. So how did your performing career evolve? How did you get to eventually play with well-known people?
Well, I think upon graduating university, I was offered a job and took a job in a symphony orchestra in Mexico because I had no jobs and no prospects at the time. And it was a job that would pay. And I had $30 in the bank. So it sounded like a good idea. I went down there and worked for a year. And then I moved back to the Chicago area. I'm from that area. And I knew a few musicians in the area and began to just kind of circulate in the clubs and among musicians and try to be visible. And one thing led to the next. I started working professionally there. And after a few years, I moved to New York City. And basically, it was about networking and sitting in and going to jam sessions and meeting musicians and just introducing myself in a sense. It was very much a word of mouth industry at the time. And then apparently word started to travel and one thing leads to the next. And the trick is that when you get the call, you have to be ready, And, you have to be lucky in a way. You have to be prepared. You got to do your homework. You've got to be able to accept the ups and downs that come your way and persevere, and so it kind of progressed in that way, I guess.
Yeah. And you've also got involved in jazz education. What is jazz education? Is that educating people about jazz?
Well, it's a broad term, and it means several things. In my case, it meant being an instructor and mentor in college programs that were dedicated to the study of jazz music by people who aspired to become professional jazz musicians.
Yeah.
Jazz education in the broader sense is simply educating the public about the art form and making it hopefully more accessible to them.
Yeah.
But my involvement was in specialized programs aimed at training aspiring jazz musicians.
Yeah. So what do you hope to achieve through jazz education then?
Well, it's a funny thing. There's an old expression, we say you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes there needs to be a greater awareness in education circles, in jazz education, particularly among the students, that this education thing is a two-way street. If they don't have the passion, if they don't have the work ethic, and come to the water and drink for themselves, the potential is extremely limited. So I always hope to achieve to give them a realistic view of what the profession is like, what the demands of the profession are, and to prepare them for the real world as best I could. That is a challenge in an academic institution.
Yeah.
But my motto was always to try to bring the street into the classroom.
Yeah.
Because I'm of a generation, we learned this craft more on the street than in the classroom, because the classroom and jazz were relatively new when I was coming up.
Yeah.
It's still a new phenomena, really, compared to most academic pursuits.
Yeah.
So I hope to achieve that. And then on the broader scale, I always hope to achieve the greater public, to achieve educating the greater public about the art form in general, and in particular, trying to make it more accessible to a broader array of people.
Yeah. And you've written a couple of method books as well relating to jazz. What are method books?
Well, method books are generically they're an effort to take a certain kind of experience and translate that experience into a methodology that helps aspiring players find a direction for their practice, and it brings their attention to what we feel are the important aspects to study and be prepared for.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's what a method book is. It's kind of one person's view as to what the priorities for the aspiring musician as far as their practice routine and enlightenment is concerned.
Yeah. And you've received a PhD from New York University in 1997. Was that an honorary thing, or did you study for that?
I'm glad you asked, because I did the work, you know, and that entailed, the PhD there was very heavily based in philosophy, of all things. Oh. So I did a ton of reading and writing about philosophy, and I can see now that the purpose for me, the outcome at least, was my reading and writing skills increased, my abilities increased tenfold. So it was extremely valuable in that respect, and I was fortunate to be able to focus on an area of research that was of great interest to me, rather than something that was just kind of remote and ethereal.
Yeah, you don't want to be spending years studying that.
Yeah, not really. I mean, there are a lot of things that are worthy of study, and some of them may seem trivial to the public in general. But in my case, it was directly related to my own interests and my own effort to simply add to the body of knowledge of a certain area of jazz scholarship.
Yeah. And you're also thinking about starting a podcast for jazz music as well. What do you think you'll be doing in that podcast?
Well, it's gotten beyond the thinking stage because I'm going to do it.
Nice.
And I think, I've been involved in the jazz music business, I don't know, for over 40 years. And I've also been involved in the jazz education field for that length of time. And over that length of time, a person gains a wealth of experience, both as a player and as an instructor. So I think the focus of my podcast, I'm interested in, again, educating people and broadening their understanding of perhaps what it's like to be a jazz musician, or what we've learned, or what our objectives are, or what it is we're trying to teach, just basically speaking to my experience as I think a fairly typical professional jazz player.
Yeah.
So I'm planning initially to solicit questions from the public and use each podcast to address various questions that I'll select that I hope would be of broad interest to people that are generally interested in jazz music, whether it be through performance, education, or any other form. And I think I will intermittently. I'm lucky, I guess, to have access, in a sense, to my peers, many of whom are actually, in fact, they're beyond my peers. They're really great musicians, but I have access to them, and thought I might interview some of them on a variety of subjects. I think that would be of great interest to listeners who are interested in jazz music.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any experience presenting podcasts? I'm wondering if being on a stage helps with the confidence of presenting, maybe?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, I have no experience as a podcaster. I'm just going by the seat of my pants. However, I have a lot of confidence because I've been performing all of my adult life. Yeah. So the idea of being in front of people, or speaking, or presenting things, or that doesn't enter into the picture for me. I feel very comfortable in that regard. And for what it's worth, my colleagues seem to think I would be good at it. And of course, we'll find out. And good is a relative term. But, I think it's something that I would enjoy doing. And we'll see if the response, hopefully it will be positive, and hopefully there will be people that will be interested. And one way or another, I can get more and more people involved in being aware of the art form and perhaps participating in it to a greater degree than they might already.
Yeah, absolutely. It's worth a try to start the podcast anyway.
Sure.
Yeah.
What have I got to lose?
Yeah, absolutely. And because it's interesting that you're only just starting it, when a year ago, when the pandemic started, that's when a lot of people maybe started thinking about, I'm going to start a podcast. Did you have any idea a year ago, or has it only came to you just now?
Well, I didn't really have the idea a year ago, although when the pandemic hit, I was aware that whether we liked it or not, we were going to have a lot of time on our hands.
Yeah.
But more recently, I have been becoming more aware of podcasts just through as a consumer, so to speak. And in doing a little research, I was frankly kind of amazed at their popularity.
Yeah.
Apparently, there are literally millions of people a day listening to all kinds of podcasts. And so I thought it might be a good vehicle to reach people on a broader level than I might be able to on other social platforms.
Yeah. So when you do get round to releasing this podcast, do you know where listeners will be able to find it?
Well, it's to the best of my understanding. Now, mind you, I'm still a novice.
Yeah.
But there is a company that I'm looking at that apparently I would provide my podcast to, and they distribute it, as I understand it, to all of the major podcast outlets. So, for example, they would make sure that it was listed in Apple iTunes or Amazon or Google or Spotify, etc. And apparently these are the places where people often go to locate podcasts. So in a sense, I'll be outsourcing that. I think I found a good company to manage that for me, but I'm still learning. So I think that once I get my initial podcast ready, perhaps I will, float a trial balloon with this company and see where it lands, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining us on the show today. It's been great talking to you about this.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I certainly hope that your listeners, that this will pique their interest enough to look for. By the way, the name of my podcast is going to be The Toddcast.
Oh, nice. I love that.
So I'm going to start with that, and we'll see where it goes. But I hope your listeners will be, their interest is piqued enough to look for it. It's probably going to drop sometime this month in March.
Okay, nice.